Well, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's webinar. My name's Charles Green. I'm part of the marketing team here at Globant. Firstly, thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We recognize that we're presenting this webinar during a time of tremendous, perhaps even unprecedented change. We initially started the idea of conducting this webinar focused on cross-industry innovation a couple of months ago. But over the past few weeks, we've had to adjust the topic to take into consideration what is happening with the spread of the COVID-19 virus and the implications that this is having on almost every business. But we also realized that there is perhaps no better time than now to discuss cross-industry innovation. We're going through such rapid change that business models which were working and viable just a few weeks ago are now maybe in serious difficulties. So we're seeing enterprises shift to remote working, they're moving workloads to the cloud, they're deploying software as a service tools almost overnight. So there is perhaps no better time than to look to different industries to see how they are responding to the situation, how they are adapting, and how they're continuing to serve their customers effectively. So in today's webinar, we're going to examine both the impact the virus is having on a couple of key industries, in particular media and gaming, but then we're going to broaden the discussion to focus more on cross-industry innovation. And to help me do that, I'm excited to welcome a couple of Globant's experts to the call, Andy and Matthias, and I'll let them briefly introduce themselves. Andy, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you, Charles. Hi, everyone. My name is Andy, VP of Technology here at Globant. I've been at the company for the past 7 years, currently focusing on media and entertainment accounts.
Super, thank you. And Matthias? You are on mute.
Sorry, yeah, trying to find the button. So, Matías Rodríguez, VP of Technology for the gaming studio, being at the company for 10 years and helping on all of our gaming projects.
Super, thank you both. And just before we start the discussion, there's a couple of very quick things to note. Firstly, everyone's microphone is going to be on mute for this session, but we would love to hear your questions. So please use the Q&A feature on the panel during the course of the webinar to ask us your questions. I will do my best to take those questions as they come, but we'll also have some time at the end. And also just very briefly, for those of you not familiar with Globant, we are a digitally native company. We help organizations with their core business and technology challenges. We have more than 12,000 employees and 17 offices around the world. But without further ado, I want to jump right into the discussion. And for this discussion, we're not going to be sharing a presentation. We're going to be doing this as a more open panel discussion between the three of us. And I want to start off by asking you, firstly, you, Andy, what is the impact so far of the coronavirus on the media industry?
Sure. So I guess, Charles, that when all this started, you know, people, at least what I heard was people were saying, oh, you guys in media, you're in for a ride, you know, all these people staying at home, all that free time to watch more content. And well, that is true, and viewership is up worldwide. Media is taking a hit, of course, as any other industry. Just think about it. Theaters are down. AMC, Regal, Cinemark, those theaters are now closed. You got movie studios that are unable to release the movies and the films that they already have produced. You have huge sports events that are being either postponed or canceled. Just think about March Madness, NBA, and the Olympics, and think about all the ad revenue that is being lost right now. So yes, there is tremendous impact in the media industry, of course.
Mm-hmm. And Matthias, with gaming, is that a similar situation?
So I would say that in our case, we are, yes, in a rise. In terms of production, we obviously, as everybody, have to send to people to work from home. And essentially that has slowed down production. As a difference with media and movies and TV series in particular, we didn't stop it necessarily production or was a big blocker, just because we can continue with that virtual production. So we essentially move into working people from home. That will affect, and there will be some delays. Now, business-wise, overall, there is an increase in consumption, and we see that many games are performing well, like recent releases like Doom Eternal and Animal Crossings. We obviously have parents and kids with more time locked down, so that obviously translates into that. Now, what we also see is that a lot of the events like GDC, E3, Gamescom, those have actually been canceled. So we will probably be seeing a wave effect with a lag and a latency, just because they are not able to perform business right now. There will probably be more delays and maybe some starvation of some games in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think it's interesting to have that perspective. I think both those industries, perhaps the stereotype of many people is that, yeah, there'll probably be industries that are being less affected than some other industries, but we can even see there that there has been, you know, significant impacts. Where do you see this kind of more on a long-term basis? You know, what do you think is going to, do you see this kind of change in behavior being something long-term? Is it going to change when we hopefully get back to you know, more of a normal situation?
Back to living. Well, I guess that's one of the two ultimate questions, right? Like number one is how long is this going to last, and number two is what's going to stick, right? What are those things that we're seeing in this Corona economy? Which of those trends and changes in consumer behavior are going to stay? I think that there's gonna be a pent up demand of people to get out of their houses and going back to living. So I do expect viewership to go down, right? But having that said, I do believe that there are some trends that we saw before all this happened that are accelerating. Like I know a lot of friends of mine, they're really looking into those sportless cable packages, right? Especially now when you have a lot of analysts, you know, beating the drums of a worldwide recession out there. So a lot of people are, you know, reevaluating the way that they're spending their money, and they're really starting to look at all those new streaming packages where a fresh pair of eyes. Packages such as, of course, Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, right? Packages that don't have a contract, and some of them even are either free, like Pluto TV, or they're going to have free tiers, like Peacock from NBC. So I do believe that some of these trends are here to stay.
Mm-hmm. And in many other ways, it's accelerating what you saw was happening beforehand. Matthias, that kind of similar situation in gaming?
So in gaming, again, from two different perspectives, from the workforce and operations and partnerships, there's obviously there will be a big rethinking on priorities. I think that even all the industries are now thinking if a lot of that travel was necessary before. Even in our cases, like Andy and myself, we were spending countless hours on airplanes, and maybe this could be a good shakedown. So I would say that long term, I would expect a shift on some culture in terms of how companies approach working from home, and then how people also appreciate that let's say, or reappreciate that time. Now, in terms of consuming and consumers and business, overall the gaming industry was already on a digitalization path, like very mature on it, convert a lot of their revenue into digital channels. And what I would probably be expecting right now is having more of these virtual events. So before, a lot of these announcements, events were thought to purely be like brick and mortar physical locations, where I see more moving into something like a Nintendo Direct approach, where a lot of companies are probably going to be conducting more digital communication. So more integrations with Twitch, mixers, and some services, even some integrations with broadcasting partners as well.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, have either of you seen examples perhaps where your industry has, you know, looked at other industries, for examples in perhaps how to cope or survive or to obtain more success, during this time of change, during this time of perhaps crisis in other industries. Have you seen perhaps examples of where they're looking to other industries?
So Charles, I can mention one on the media space. As I mentioned before, with the theater closed, you have a lot of studios that have movies that were already scheduled to be released, to go to theatrical. Of course, with all these theaters closed, that's a huge problem, right? It's worth mentioning what NBC Universal is doing right now. They've announced that they're going to release on April the 10th. They're going to release the sequel of Trolls through digital distribution platforms such as Amazon Prime Video. This is something that the industry has been thinking for some time, right? But now it's no longer an option. It's a must, right? So very interesting example right there. And besides Troll, they also have other movies such as The Invisible Man. Right now, they're available to rent through digital platforms, right? So I guess that's a great example.
Mm-hmm. And it also kind of gets back to your earlier point about accelerating those kind of existing trends and those existing dynamics which are already playing out. Matthias, any kind of past examples from gaming?
So on the gaming side, again, tackling from the operation point of view, virtualization of workforce, automation of infrastructure, cloud adoption, both for production and infrastructure, as well as cloud gaming. And overall, traditionally, our practice tends to be more close, bare metal, our own servers, and now we see more and more collaboration with cloud providers, with regional providers, with regional operators that are going to be more open. So I think that's something where we see gaming companies becoming more flexible, where before they were very, very strict in various aspects.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned there kind of those kind of relationships with cloud providers. I think that kind of brings a nice segue into the next part that I'd like to kind of talk to you guys about, is about what about the technology implications. You both mentioned that for example media companies now looking to distribute films productions via streaming. Gaming, there's much greater demand perhaps for some games. Do organizations, perhaps already have the technology architecture to be able to scale quickly and effectively during this time, or is the work that they need to be doing?
Well, I guess that a lot of companies already had that digital distribution platforms out there, but unless you're Bill Gates, I don't think that anybody was prepared for this. Nobody saw this coming, right? So, those platforms right now, they're being challenged, they're being stressed, and there's a lot of companies out there that are really running on all four cylinders, just making sure that everything is running smoothly and the content is being distributed. But when you look at the news and you see that, because it's not just about the platform, it's also about the conduit itself, right? So you guys, I'm sure somebody have seen on the news, companies like Google with YouTube, or even Netflix, that they have publicly announced that they're going to be lowering the quality, the resolution of their content just to preserve the bandwidth, right? And make sure that bandwidth is available for essential services and also day-to-day things like homeschooling, right? I got an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. They're homeschooling right now. So, they really need to make sure, everybody needs to make sure that we keep the internet up and running, not just for consuming content.
Mm-hmm. And apart from leaving kind of internet bandwidth aside, I imagine also with gaming companies there must be also some changes there happening as well, right?
Definitely. Again, updating operations of servers, and again adopting cloud solution and distributed solutions so they can basically continue to push operations. I think that infrastructure and architecture side, again, we did the whole work to basically have the workforce working from home. There's a big still open topic that is related to hardware and console development. In some cases, both in media and in gaming, we have actual dependency with particular hardware that legally speaking cannot leave offices premises. So right now we are thinking on some architectural approach, but I could see the potential for a lot of innovation and probably some startups jumping into how to properly optimize this work from home, right? Because everybody give tips about that, and we are all understand the implication of working from home. But when you put a device that it's a kind of a secret and cannot be taken outside, you don't have pictures of it, it actually changed a lot that game. So I could see a lot of still some opportunities there, and there could be probably some conversations with Sony and Nintendo, especially on the horizon of new consoles, right? Because it's not a secret that this console has been announced, that a lot of companies and partners has been working around that. But again, it's not something that easy that we can take home and do working from home so openly. So I think that's still an open topic that we would love to see more innovation around.
Yeah, sure. And I guess also kind of touching perhaps an opportunity now to dive a bit deeper into some of the points that you guys have already made. But we spoke a little bit about some of the broader priorities and the trends amongst organizations. Do you see these accelerating, and how does it depend perhaps for different organizations within different industries? How do you see these kind of broader trends within your within the media and gaming industries playing out, resulting from the impacts of this pandemic?
So when it comes to media, I would say that it depends on what type of media organization you are, right? If you're a cable operator, if you're a content producer, if you're a movie studio, and where are you in terms of digital adoption, right? You guys mentioned cloud, and that's definitely a priority, right? Because cloud really does allow you to simplify your operation and reduce your total cost of ownership. Right. So, and that's definitely a must right now. Going back to my previous example, if you're a movie studio and you're the CTO, you're definitely thinking about ways of digitally distributing your content, tapping into those existing platforms. Right. If you're NBC, if you're AT&T or Warner Media, right now what you're thinking about is how soon can I get my digital product out there? AT&T is working on HBO Max, and NBC Universal is working with Peacock, right? Which are still not there in the market, but their release date is April and May, respectively. And if you're already out there, right? If you're a Disney Plus, if you're a Hulu, if you're a Netflix, right now what you're doing is just making sure that everything is running smoothly, right? But one thing that, and I was discussing this yesterday with some colleagues of mine, is the production pipeline, right? As you can imagine, the production pipeline is at pause right now, and that's huge. I mean, there's a reason why Netflix invested all that amount of money in original content like House of Cards, or Hulu did the same with Handmaid's Tale, because that's how you can differentiate yourself from your competitors, right? Content is king. So there's only so much original content out there. So what I'm foreseeing is that at some point, people are going to run out of original content to watch. And you got to remember that there is no contract in this cut the cord movement, right? So really the loyalty is towards the content. So I foresee a lot of pressure when it comes to really focusing on client acquisition, trial conversion, and client retention.
And are they similar kind of dynamics in gaming?
So as I mentioned before, the production of video games, it's purely virtual. So it doesn't necessarily have the implications or the complexities of gathering people and setting up a stage. So business-wise, I think that most of the companies, after solving all of these working from home issue, they are focusing on how to essentially push the releases to the market. They understand people is at home, so, and they understand that there's implications of velocity and productivity of teams. So I would see them again pushing in terms of moving on into common dates. Some other games that may have some relaxed timelines, they may see some releases. But as we see, overall online presence on video game has increased. People is at home, is commuting less. And we essentially are in the upcoming releases of very highly expected titles from Valorant from Riot, which has all of the old school Counter-Strike audience basically waiting for this Friday reveal. And again, titles like Cyberpunk and a lot of those titles are highly expected. So I think that most of those companies are trying to push. What they are basically rethinking is how that release is going to be conducted. Again, they play with the advantage of the audience being very tech savvy and open. So and there's even inside jokes that gamers, we were prepared for this pandemic for over years, because most of us are really spends a lot of time in computers. We communicate over Discord, we use Twitch, we share screen, we broadcast, we kind of have been living on this virtual world forever. So there are a lot of jokes around that we didn't even have to change a lot on our daily lives. We were basically doing the same thing. And we basically realized that our life was called social distancing from the very beginning. So I think that from that side, they're very open to virtual events. So we saw a lot of these virtual events happening, and I can see a lot of that plus in-game events like we saw for games like Fortnite and World of Warcraft and some others, and even big releases on VR that Half-Life Helix and some others that were recently released, they are having very good adoption. So I think that the gaming industry understand that there's a responsibility to keep people entertained and not getting crazy at home. So I think that they are going to try to take that advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's certainly, given the maturity of the level of digitalization in gaming, it's certainly one of those industries which is much better prepared for such a situation than many other industries.
Mm. Yeah, and most of the recurrent revenue comes from digital transactions, and as a difference to the subscription model that Andy mentioned, because there's a progression associated, you cannot step out of those services so easily sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So when we are talking about this time of change and disruption for many industries, businesses do need to look to new areas for inspiration. So, are there examples where you've seen so far where organizations, have successfully taken ideas from other industries that they've then been able to implement?
Well, we've been talking about streaming, right? So really streaming is a form of direct to consumer. So when you think about, a traditional media company until a couple of years ago, what they did was they produced content, right? TV shows, movies, in some cases even networks, right? And then they sold those networks to theaters, to cable operators. They sold their content, right? So it was a B2B model, business to business. With the internet, right, and with the success of Netflix, now all of a sudden they realize that they are able to go direct to the consumer, direct to their audience, so the people that actually consumes their content. And while a lot of people believe that everybody's kind of like following the footsteps of a Netflix, really direct to consumer comes from the retail industry. So think about the Nike stores or the Apple stores, right? So they were the first ones to really go direct to consumer with retail. So instead of putting their products in retail chains, right, they put together their own first brick and mortar stores and then their online stores. So a lot of the trends that we're seeing right now in the media industry really comes from the retail industry. And one thing that I believe that's fascinating from my point of view, so my background is with data and analytics, with that business change comes so many implications, right? Because you're changing your model, your business model completely, and you're changing your target audience, right? So it used to be a corporation, a cable operator, a theater that you were selling your content. Now you're going direct to your audience, and you don't know who they are, right? So there's a lot of investments being made around building data platforms and data products to really understand who the audience are, what is the content that they're craving for, what makes them come, what makes them stay. So from a data point of view, it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. I think also what you mentioned there, that move to the direct-to-consumer model has had major implications for many industries, not just in the retail or in the media industry, but you can look even further. You can look all the way over to to large-scale manufacturing, for example, and you see those kind of trends starting to blend over there. There's an interesting example in Spain, for example, where Siemens, they typically build these trains. They are responsible for building the trains for the Madrid-Barcelona high-speed train line, for example. But now part of their contract is related to the customer satisfaction. So you see these kind of ideas that kind of started in perhaps one area in retail, moved over to media, and then they're even going over to manufacturing and other sectors as well, where the importance of understanding who the customer is, understanding the concerns of the customer becomes much more important. And that's also driving a lot of innovation. How do they interact? How do they sell products in a lot of different industries? It's fascinating.
Right. Everybody wants to be a customer-centric company right now.
Exactly, yeah.
They just have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned there also a little bit about the focus in data and analytics. Do you see that also perhaps changing kind of organizational structures, perhaps changing the importance of how organizations are doing their research and development, perhaps doing their product development? Do you see that having any impact?
Sure. Yes, for sure. The role of chief data officer didn't exist 5 years ago, right? And it's something that exists now. I mean, every company wants to be data driven, but these changes in their business model really made data a first-class citizen for a lot of companies. I remember when my first job in San Francisco, I was as a of data and analytics. I was reporting to the VP of it, right? So, his world was really all about AWS and cloud ops and DevOps and servers and databases. And I remember in one staff meeting, I was talking about data and insights, and all the things that we were gathering from the data. And at one point, he looked at me and he said, "Just remind me again, why is it that you're part of my team?" Because it was so disparate, right? So a lot of companies right now are really trying to figure out where data fits in their organization. Should it be in infrastructure because of servers and databases? Should it be with marketing? Should it be with finance, right? Or should it be an area in itself? And I think that's where many industries are going, that in order to make data a first-class citizen, data needs to be an organization in itself that provides services to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, exactly. In order to become that kind of customer-focused organization, you need the data to understand your customers, how they're behaving, to do that, to understand the customer journey mapping. You need that data to understand that. And
there was Charles, there was a CEO. I'm just going to mention a joke. There was a CEO for one of our clients, and he openly said in his staff meetings, "I trust in God. All others must bring data." Right. So I always remember that phrase.
Exactly. And in terms of gaming, Matthias, are you also seeing examples of where gaming companies have successfully taken ideas from other industries?
On the similar lines that you were talking, direct to consumer, it has been a long path already. So most of the big companies like Ubisoft, EA, Valve, like pretty much all of the big companies, Epic, they have created their own equivalent of direct to consumers. So we, over the past of these years, we saw moving from a physical media into some centralized, let's say, digital distribution, mostly around Steam. But right now we are seeing an explosion around. There's something called like PC Master Race, Store Wars, similar to the streaming wars, where essentially we have different players from GOG to Steam to Epic Games jumping into that. So that's something that was highly adopted. Similarly to the subscription model, most like Uplay Plus are basically copying some of those on the business model side. Then in terms of cross-pollination, being a storytelling industry, we essentially can learn, and there are games about everything. So you can learn about biology, like playing sport, history, strategy, resource management, playing Age of Empires, military strategy, weapons attachment, ammo, playing Escape from Tarkov, or even Counter-Strike, or some of those. So those are like some examples where essentially gaming companies are able to learn some specific domains and then essentially create experiences around that. Even for things like pandemics, there's a game called Plague Inc., which essentially explains and plays around the core mechanics of that. And if you play that game, you can understand the importance of social distancing, for instance.
Fascinating.
So yeah, and then obviously companies are very used to have a partner of a network of different partners that can help with that. One particular example is a game called Hellblade, which basically plays around a character that has some psychosis and it hears voices. And that game was made in collaboration with neuroscientists and medicine experts. And it was a game that if you play it, it gives you an amazing perspective. It's an amazing game. And it gives you a perspective of what that people is going through. And it even won a BAFTA award. Just because, again, sometimes these games, similar to what happens with media, these movies, these stories, they actually put you in some perspective. So, and for that, they have to go through that learning process. And they need to get into that domain knowledge. On the other way around, also some initiatives are around sharing some of the gaming mechanics to non-gaming experiences. And we saw some reincarnations in the past around gamification and some aspects. It was kind of not sure if well implemented through achievements and to some mechanics that were somehow basic, but reality is that there is some synergy between healthcare, retail, manufacturers that has been interacting with gaming or gaming technologies in what is called like serious game simulation, digital twins right now that are something that is very, very, very common. Over the past weeks, we also saw like incredibly peak in consultancy and a lot of clients that are non-gaming or not tech related asking about VR, telepresence, and some of the topics we spoke in a previous webinar with Facebook. That is something that also maybe some of these gaming technologies can help. Then quick examples, we have Folded that is helping with protein search even for COVID-19. We have like a GTA 5 engine being used for training autonomous driving. You have a Stagecraft and Unreal engine being used for Disney, Star Wars, and Mandalorian. So virtual production as well as digital stages, it's something that is also in collaboration between these two particular industries.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned there a little bit about companies interested in kind of understanding more about virtual reality and augmented reality and to use some of these technologies. Can you perhaps give a bit more detail about kind of how we're perhaps helping companies when they're coming to us? What is their typical concern that they're looking for help with?
Well, obviously, a lot of companies, as everybody, was forced to basically send everybody to work from home. So right now, they are trying to find this space where they can collaborate and reconnect with people. So, and in the gaming industry, there has been some topics around something called the metaverse, which is similar to the concept of Ready Player One, Osiris kind of world. And right now, there's some companies that I'm seeing they are going to be accelerated when they provide collaboration, virtual collaboration. So being able to see what other people is seeing and have that immersion channel, right? So that's why they see VR and AR as a quotation natural solution to bring people together. And from our perspective, it goes on first grounding some of the expectations, because it's a brand new area in general, and there are some companies, there is hardware, but there's no standard like Zoom or Slack or Google Hangouts. So there are a lot of startups, and for you to craft a solution, it actually requires not only to evaluate the technical aspects of that, but also the storytelling, immersion, art, sound design that sometimes companies on the financial space are not used to. So they are actually facing some changes and challenges there. And from our side, it's basically grounding on the technical aspects, balancing what can be done and what cannot be done. And then from the creative point of view, seeing how can we help on that. And we have been sketching these days around, and there are a ton of prototypes, and a lot of people is actually thinking on how can we change backgrounds here, and how can we like do some stuff like can position people and maybe give some immersion and context.
I mean, it's a wonderful example of how kind of your expertise in gaming is now being applied via some of these new technologies like augmented and virtual reality to some other industries and helping them navigate these difficult times. I want to now move on a little bit and just remind to the audience, if you do have any questions, please do let us know via the Q&A in the Zoom. We'd love to take your questions. But now I want to move on slightly to talk a bit more about the best practices and the strategies for cross-industry innovation. So guys, is there a methodology that either you see that behind how you can successfully learn from another industry, or is it simply a case of reading and being aware of what is happening?
So going a step back, because a couple of years ago, cross-industry innovation was a nice to have, right? So when you were out of ideas, somebody would say, well, think outside the box, right? To me right now, thinking outside the box is something that you should do as step one, because most likely somebody has already solved the challenge that you're facing, right? I think that I think it was released in the year 2013, a research a paper from Forrester that said that most likely disruptive innovation will come from outside your own industry, right? So it's of paramount importance to look at what's happening outside. Last week we were on a phone call with people from Microsoft, right? And they were talking about this new concept, the FANGs of the world, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Googles of the world that are really invading other people's industry, right? And creating that disruptive innovation, right? So that's one thing. I really like, there's a website that they gave me a lot of very interesting ideas when I started reading about this. So they say that ideas are not so much of inventions, but they are mostly about discoveries, right? So they have this concept, which is, first of all, look at the concept that is of interest, then try to combine that, draw an analogy, and transfer it to your own context, and then create something that makes sense for your own industry. So I highly recommend that website to anybody that's really interested about how can cross-industry innovation fuel some ideas and draw inspirations to their problems.
Mm-hmm. I think also related to that, I mean, often one of the challenges of business is to get outside of just incremental innovation, right? Is how do you do something more disruptive? And that, in that case, often using a framework like that, which helps you go outside of your industry, can help you get beyond kind of some of the restrictions of just doing incremental type innovation. And Matthias, any kind of ideas from your side?
So at least from my perspective, I think that the best recommendation is to try out things. So it's obviously good to read, but it's way better if you experience. So there are some, obviously some industries that are more easy to experience, but as we travel, as we see movies, as we read books, as we play games, we actually gain perspective around what is happening around other industries. It's very common right now that, or was very common some months ago, that you could even see some events happening and you can even visit them. But overall, my experience will be to experience firsthand, especially some of the things that are more on the experience side. And it's similar to what we were talking before. There's a lot of people researching about VR, thinking about how to use VR, even sketching experiences on VR without even having put the device once. So I think that it's a matter of perspective. And then obviously having a strong network of partners or facilitating that access, even if you go to events or you acquire that equipment and you try it out, I think that is very important to basically experience all of that so you can gain the perspective that will help you craft the solution for your particular. And again, similar to what Andy was mentioning in that discovery, innovation, cross-industry innovation is actually not a finite game. There's no winning condition or end state. You only move forward and get better. So failing, collaborating with others, and testing and experiencing, it's basically the major framework. You can see a lot of different formal frameworks, but they all are around the same concept. Just do things and learn by doing, and you will get the perspective that you need.
Mm-hmm. Super. And also just received one question from Richard asking us to repeat the name of the website. I believe it was crossindustryinnovation.com, and you're right.
That's correct. Yes.
Correct. Okay, super. There was a slight pause in the connection there. So also when you see or hear such an idea, as you guys have mentioned, and you think it might have some value for your business, is there a way that you should best evaluate it?
Well, I would say, and just to mention some examples, nobody gave much credit to Spotify or to Uber or to Airbnb until it was too late, right? There's a lot of ego within the industry, right? People saying, well, they don't know my industry, they don't understand my industry, and that ego only increases when you're in a predominant position, right? So my recommendation would be always stay humble, really understand that the future does not look like the past. And if you are not leading the path towards that future, towards innovation, somebody else will. So my advice to that would be stay alert, stay focused, and don't disregard the things that other players are doing, even if it's some garage in some place in deep America, because somebody will come up with and will present a challenge to your predominant position.
Exactly. A lot of the competition is coming from areas where we didn't expect it to come from a few years ago. Every industry is seeing new startups, new innovation coming from areas perhaps where you didn't quite expect it, not such a long time ago. And Matthias?
So usually when we see an idea, I obviously agree with Andy in terms of staying humble and open, and again, similar to what I was mentioning before, try to experience and see. I would say that another approach is also when you evaluate this new idea, try to break down all assumptions, especially on these moments. Like again, not a lot of theater or even production movie companies were thinking on releasing streaming before. Now they are forced. So I think that being humble, like breaking a lot of those preconceptions, and then at least our approach is always try to play around it. So when you see an idea, do some visual representation, role play it, create some assets, discuss it, show it to others. And so that way you can conceptualize and you can validate as you gain feedback. So that's again kind of mini playing. And for that in Globant, we have labs and every studio, every part of the organization basically allows you to play around that and challenge that status. So I would say that in order to make an informed, because sometimes innovation could be confused also with like a very light, I just throw the idea. And we all need to agree that ideas right now, it's a commodity, it's the execution of the idea that really brings the value. So like besides being innovative in some approaches, it actually is the execution that makes the difference. So I would say that play, prototyping, and then as you see this key feedback from different stakeholders, try to see how can you craft ideas. And that's why you see like early access on games and start to be more close to your audience, so you can see what you really need to build for them, right?
And what about when those ideas perhaps are not successful?
Well, I guess that this applies for both of us, right? But when you take a look at the media industry, right? Not every movie is a blockbuster, and you know, not every TV show gets to go on air for 15 seasons. So this is an industry that understands that it's a very creative space, and that you know, a lot of those ideas are not that successful. So in a lot of ways, you can really apply the concept of fail fast in the media industry, and especially with everything that's going on with the streaming wars. There's a lot of products and platforms that are not making it to the finish line, right? And that is expected. But overall, I don't see a pushback in the media industry to things that don't stick. Quite the opposite.
And that's the same with gaming?
Obviously similar. Every organization should embrace a failure, particularly on gaming. We have this concept of get good or get good. Essentially just fail, stand up, try again, and learn from it. I think that the most important part, and I don't think that even if an idea is not successful, it's not successful maybe from the business point of view, or maybe it's not successful from the technical approach, it is always successful on the learning. So if you take this, again, more humble approach of let's learn about this, and part of the learning process is building artifacts and things, solutions that could not see the end line. Again, for a lot of us that been working for many years on software, we are pretty used on that. I used to work for like a cell phone company that was very famous in the 90s. It doesn't almost exist nowadays. And it was like countless cell phones that didn't even saw the light. So I think that, again, the most important part, it will be to do a good postmortem, archiving that, have a good process to actually learn from them and being able to revisit them in the future. Some ideas are ahead of time, or some ideas need more maturation, more cross-pollination with other industries. So something that I learned along those lines with some of the big companies that we have been working is when you do an exploration, even if the idea is not quotation successful, take the time to process, take the time to actually archive that and have a recovery process. And maybe that will be the level one. Level two will be have the kind of practice to revisit some of them over time, because there could be some concepts, for instance, in this moment, that some time ago, ideas like let's release movies early on streaming will be a no-no from the beginning. So I think that even ideas that are contextually not successful in some contexts, it's good to, once you do the investment, and that's a good R&D practice. So then it's also a good way to showcase how really innovation works and take away a lot of that lightweight and let's just research and Google about ideas. And if we do the investment of creating artifacts, let's have that practices to really archive them and have them as a library of proof of concept. Like in Globant, for instance, we showcase a lot of those demos and things for clients in some cases, so when it's possible.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Well, now I know we've got just a few minutes left for the webinar today. So I want to again mention that if you do have any questions, we would love to take them. So please do ask us those questions in the Q&A panel. And actually, during the course of our discussion, a couple of questions did come in from the audience. The first one, guys, is can you mention some examples of cross-industry innovations applied to the COVID-19 pandemic?
I'll take a swing at that. From the media standpoint, I would say that, well, of course, there's news coverage, right? But that's just part of the industry. I also see an educational aspect to it as well, right? That's really helping people to further understand what all this is about, and just spreading out useful and timely information. That's on the media industry. But then the other day, I was talking to a colleague of ours. He's working with a company here in the U.S. and they're repurposing their 3D printing facilities to make face shields and face masks to supply healthcare professionals in this time of crisis. I think that that's a very meaningful and timely contribution that that everybody is really needing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, another further question from the audience. Do you see any further examples of synergies between media and gaming that perhaps we can hope to see?
Mati, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, we can both speak a lot. I think that there's actually, again, a lot of opportunities around VR and AR world, both again for perspective as well as storytelling. Then on the media side, as well as gaming side, esports, competitive gaming, it's something that we saw Hulu even creating a Rainbow Six TV series some time ago. Plus some exclusive dealerships with some broadcasters like ESPN. It's actually having already a dedicated channel as well as many others. So I think that there will be more collaboration in terms of that, especially right now with another industry, which is the real sports one, that we are seeing a lot of trends that when they are not able to conduct the Olympics, they will conduct the virtual Olympics. So that's a lot of cross-pollination between traditional sports or real traditional sports organization plus gaming companies in conjunction with broadcasting and media companies. So I would say that there's going to be a lot there. Then in terms of virtual production and the usage of Unreal Engine and real-time technology for virtual production, as we saw on Mandalorian, using stagecraft, I think that it's going to be amazing. And we saw even Unreal and some form of composing for the Weather Channel and some other traditional media in terms of showcasing some different perspectives. So we have now companies like the Weather Channel, National Geographic, Disney, investing even more and more on gaming technology and gaming pipeline and methodologies.
I'm gonna add another example to that, and just because I was a huge fan of that game back in the days. You guys remember that video game Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? So Netflix released a series, but it's an interactive cartoon. Meaning that the audience can choose, right? At given points, it can choose what the character is going to do. And, it reminded me in a very simplistic way, it reminded me of those old graphical adventures that I used to play back in the 90s. So there's tons of examples. Media and gaming, they're very close in so many ways.
Okay. And we have one final question. I think it's probably for you, Andy. That you mentioned earlier the use of data and analytics in media in order to understand consumers. Can you perhaps talk a bit about what they're using and what types of analysis they're doing, and perhaps also how they're using artificial intelligence?
Okay. So what I've been seeing, and you got to remember that media companies are not technology companies per se, right? At least not in the sense of, the Googles of the world and the Facebook of the world. what I'm seeing is that a lot of them are adopting cloud products and cloud platforms, whether it's building their data platforms over AWS or GCP, Google Cloud Platform, or Microsoft Azure. So I see a lot of companies building data platforms and products using those services, right? So instead of building hardware and building and purchasing software and then installing that software and then starting to actually build things. I see a lot of companies that are using those services offered by these cloud providers to speed up that time to insight, right? Which is paramount importance. The type of analysis that they're doing, so there's a lot that revolves around client acquisition, right? Trial conversion. There's a lot of analysis around recommendation. That's crucial, right? So all these companies are buying entitlements, right? Which essentially it means rights to have a TV show or a movie, but then you want to make sure that the people are actually viewing it. So there's a lot of analysis around that. Who's my client? What are they watching? And what else can I recommend? Because any of these companies has thousands of hours of content, right? So how do you surface that content? It has to be relevant. You can't just pick randomly, right? So there's a lot of manpower right now focused on, okay, how can we improve the recommendations, right? And all that is using, whether it's machine learning or deep learning. Hulu had a very interesting project, which was around, it was kind of like, think about it like the DNA Genoma project. It was kind of a similar thing around video content, right? So yeah, there's very interesting stuff going on when it comes to data and media.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Well, I notice we're nearly at the top of the hour now, and I want to be respectful of people's time. So firstly, I want to say a big thank you to you both, Matthias and Andres, for taking the time to share your expertise with us today. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you also to everyone who has attended the session today. If you have any further questions or any kind of follow-up comments that you would like to leave us with, please let us know. We'd love to continue this conversation. And we will be making a recording available within the next 24 hours as well. But with that, I'd like to say thank you all and wish you all a very pleasant rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.